Welcome to this edition of When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine, a discussion of sustainable living and what that means to you and me. I'm Jay Warmke.
And I'm Annie Warmke.
You certainly are. And today we're going to talk about how to die in a sustainable way, or how to make sure that bucket you just kicked wasn't toxic.
Okay.
So, all right. So we're really talking.
Where do you come up with these
I
things?
don't know.
They just come to you in your sleep or something?
They're my legacy. So. All right. So
to know.
Part of what we're talking about here, and it's a serious subject, but it's also one that we won't treat overly seriously, but people die, and it's one of those weird things that as a culture, as individuals, we don't want to acknowledge this. We're going to get people feeling a little bit squeamish. The reality is people die. In fact, 50 million people die
in
every
this country?
year. No, I think it's worldwide.
Oh, worldwide.
It's got to be worldwide.
50 million.
50 million. That'd be one. Of course, it is 2020.
It's a big industry, folks.
Right.
Well,
and it's
just
huge.
let me say that it hasn't always been like that, because there was
people didn't used to die.
No, there were a lot of people dying, and there have
right.
been pandemics and all kinds of stuff. But I mean, we didn't give up our power over the process of death
Sure.
and burial. We had people die in our home, and then we had a wake, and people came from far and near, and honored the person. Often women would take care of the body,
Sure.
clean the body. And
it was a less antiseptic process, so people were not as squeamish about it because it was part of their reality.
It was also an amazing way to love and say goodbye.
Sure.
And so we've given all that up to some strange thing.
Okay, well, what I want to talk about here, because that is not our reality today. This industry of death has become quite unsustainable. And so I wanted to begin
But
this process.
You wrote on the paper, death is not sustainable.
Death is not sustainable.
I'm like, wait a minute.
Although
I think it's forever, Jay.
it may be final.
I'm pretty sure.
All right, I plan on sustaining my death. So anyway.
I won't like that if I
All
go.
Okay, so I want to identify what the problems are first.
Okay.
Then we'll talk about some of the solutions. So,
Well, tell us how death is not sustainable.
first
you
off-
you mean the process of
well,
how
the
it's all
process of
treated?
how we dispose of the body. That's what I'm going to focus on mostly. So we end up with graveyards, and this is a Western culture. Obviously, different cultures handle things differently, but I'm
Well, there
in
are
the
lots
United
of graveyards
States.
in other countries.
I know there are, but it's a Western kind of thing at the
I
moment.
love graveyards.
All right, let me finish.
Okay.
All right, so we're gonna so you've got all of these bodies going into these graveyards, and eventually in high population areas this becomes a problem. So you can either go down, go deeper into the ground, or go up. So some of the solutions that we've had
Like buildings with dead bodies in it?
like in Sao Paulo, Brazil, they have a 14-story cemetery. Basically, it's a building full of bodies, 14 stories tall. And another example in Taiwan, they've got a 20-story building. Now there it's cremated remains, but they have 400,000 cremated remains in this one building, the 20-story building. And in fact, I guess when you can put a little card and there's a computer thing and it'll retrieve the ashes and super high tech.
That must cost a lot of money. But here's the thing I think is part of the challenge of this idea that you're going to talk about. And that is that, so there's a reason all those people in Sao Paulo have all those bodies, is because there are some forms of particularly Christianity that think it's a sin to do things like cremate. So you got to have the body.
Well, that may be the case, but I don't want to get into that. I'm just going to say what is, not the reason it is.
Well, there are cultural reasons, though, why
Sure.
these things exist.
Well, even in cremated areas, Hong Kong is full up. They said there's a 50,000 body waiting list for cremation.
Yeah, but you have
So-
ashes. You could just like
No,
pot
but they're
a
not
plant
cremated
with
yet.
it.
They're not cremated.
Oh, they're
This is
waiting to
backlog.
cremate them.
Yeah.
Sheesh,
And so, like, for instance, the last cemetery that's open in Manhattan, the vaults start at $350,000. So this
Vaults, you mean?
a burial vault. That's your only option there. And
So they put the casket in the ground? Is that what you're talking
Yeah,
about?
or
Or is
above
it like a
ground.
building?
No, it could be in the ground or above. In fact, it's funny. I remember as a kid riding on the bus going to school, And we passed by this thing, and it always said,
A cemetery?
no, it wasn't a cemetery. It was a building supply place. And they always
Oh.
said, we sell burial vaults and septic tanks.
Well, it's similar.
It's basically the same thing, except without a pipe or whatever.
But wait a minute. I just want to say there's difference between what you're talking about. So vault in the ground holds the casket, but above ground.
You're talking about a mausoleum.
Like, yeah.
No, but a vault is just a concrete casing that holds the coffin. So it could be above ground, could be below ground, doesn't matter. So they're just charging you $350,000 for a spot. And another solution
is there
that
a
they've run
shortage
into,
of those too?
I'm sure, yeah.
Wow.
In Manhattan.
Who has $350,000?
Somebody who wants to die. Well, you don't need it anymore. Just spend it in Manhattan. So, and then there's grave recycling, which I found quite macabre, but interesting. In England, it's a big thing, like especially in London. Basically, they say, look, if you haven't used your grave, I don't know how they determine, but they basically say if the body's been in there for 75 years and the family doesn't object, we're going to put another body in there.
But they do the same thing in France, and they pay women to go and clean the graves every so many times a year, so it looks like somebody's maintaining it. Otherwise, the government comes in and says, that grave's gone. We're putting another body in there.
Well, and it's an issue, you know. Then you get the other issue of when you bury bodies, human bodies can be quite toxic, especially when they treat them like embalming. And the statistic I saw is that 800,000 gallons of formaldehyde, which is a cancer-causing agent, is used every year in the United States as part of the embalming process. And the whole idea of embalming to me is bizarre anyway, but it's basically just for that couple of days, I guess, for people who can, oh, she looks so natural, that kind of thing. And it's a weird.
Well, it's for extending the body so people can come for the funeral or look at it
or whatever.
But the other thing is, I guess pollution also could come because a lot of people take a lot of pharmaceuticals. Wouldn't that go into the ground too?
It might. Those may be less long-lived, but there are issues like metallic body parts, pacemakers.
But the
implants.
caskets are supposed to be watertight.
Well, maybe not.
But if they're wooden, don't they break down over time?
They typically do. So they said in a 10-acre average cemetery, you're going to find that there's about 1,000 tons of metal.
Wow. In the ground?
Yeah, as a part associated
leaking
with the burials.
Yeah.
20,000 tons of concrete and enough wood to build 40 homes. So
wow.
Even if you're not talking about pollution, that's a lot of stuff to just stick in the ground and bury. So that's an issue. Now, let's assume you decide you're going to go through with cremation. And actually, cremation is the top choice for disposal. In 2016, it was about 50% here in the United States. They're anticipating by 2035, it'll be about 80% of all burials will be cremation. But the process...
I don't think so. I think people are afraid of it.
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, you were talking about your uncle who was afraid he was going to be burned alive.
So these are stories that get passed down. He worked in a funeral home, and he was my great uncle, and he worked in a funeral home back in probably the 1920s. And they apparently buried somebody alive, and they had it in the box or something, and he couldn't get out. And when they went to lift the lid, it was... This
is a story you tell around campfires, right?
No, this story was true because he was terrified. He had everything written out in his will that they had to wait so many days and do certain things to make sure he was dead before they stuck him in the ground because he didn't want to be buried alive.
I think that's a consumer tip, okay? Before disposing of the body, make sure the person is
dead.
Let's just sort of...
Because death is sustainable.
Let's assume this. All right, so you've got that. But then the process of cremation, and in going through all of this, it just reminds me of the old Monty Python skit where it's like they're all pretty nasty. But all of these
What's
issues,
all pretty nasty?
How you die.
Mm-hmm.
Basically. So with cremation, we think of that as a cleaner kind of disposal process.
But doesn't it pollute the air and stuff?
Yeah, it does, because you're burning at 12,000 degrees or 1,200 degrees Fahrenheit.
Ouch.
For 45 to 90 minutes. So, almost an hour and a half. And then of course afterwards, any of the bone material, any of the solids get ground up into a dust, and
Well, I
it's
want to
quite
say
a energy intensive
I didn't
process.
realize they grind it, because when
Yeah.
my ancestor or my relatives had cremations, there were bits of bone in
I
there.
know. Well, the grinding may not have been overly effective,
And
but there's
also
a lot.
stuff from your teeth.
Yeah, there's a lot of CO2, a lot of nitrous oxide. You know, you're
Really?
burning fossil fuels, you're disposing of this. It is a highly polluting process.
Also, if the person was they put the formaldehyde in the person, that would be going up into the.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't see anything.
But that would
Maybe
be
you're
one
not
of it.
supposed to.
Oh no, they do that.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Well, then you've really got some pollution. So all of these things are problematic as from a sustainability, from a green living while you're dying kind of perspective. But then you add into this just the amazing high cost of it. And to me, okay, before we get into, I'm going to break
I know,
down
but
some
I
of
want to
these
say
costs.
something. The real challenge here, the real sort of aha, is that we don't talk about death
Right.
in this country. So we don't talk about how we want to take care of things when we're going to die. We just think everybody else is going to be responsible for it. And this is one of those issues where we leave it. We act like we're going to be there and watch the funeral. So we want to have a say, or we don't want anything to do with it. We want to pretend like we're never going to die.
Sure.
And
it's my party and I'll die if I want to.
That's
right.
And so we leave it. It's like when we abandon the idea that we're going to have the person at home and prepare their body at home in a loving way, we gave up all these customs that help people to move on to the next level of life.
And I personally believe one of the reasons these things are so expensive is because the person who has to make the purchasing decision, because it's been left to the grieving relative, and they are in the absolute most, terrible place probably in their whole life. They're being asked to do these things. You've got these people in this industry going, well, of course you want the brass
you're like
lined,
family. You're like family to us.
You want this,
yes.
and the prices just go crazy. So the average cost, I'll use state of Ohio, for just the funeral is about a little over $7,000, $7,049. And when you add in the cost of burial to the funeral, so the plot, the stone, all of that, it comes to about $19,519 on average to stick a body in the ground. So now if you go to a place like Hawaii, the average cost is going to be $41,000. Now, my cheap nature is such that you just sort of say there's got to be a cheaper way, right? So
wait a minute. So I just want to say that one of the challenges here is, how do you pay for this? And I'm going to answer that question in that I have seen this over and over and over. People who have lived in poverty have had insurance policies to pay for this stuff, and it's really unbelievable that the thousands and thousands of dollars for basically the minimum. I know I recently, one of my friends, her mother died rather suddenly, and her mother had 2 insurance policies. They had nothing, but they had 2 insurance policies to pay for her death. And we went to the funeral home, which was a nightmare. And I don't even want to talk about that. And then we
That's
went.
Good. I don't want you to.
Okay. And then we went to the cemetery to look at the plots, and then we were supposed to look at the headstones. And I said, I think it's probably a good idea. Don't make a decision today because you're upset. And the salesperson wasn't that keen about it. But so in the room, they have this amazing brass thing, headstone that has etchings of the people holding their grandchildren and everything. I asked her, how much did that cost? And she said, $35,000.
Yeah. Well, if you don't buy that one, you're just cheap. So, all right. Well, let's take a break here. And I want to just let people know that you are listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke, reminding you, quite literally, it is indeed the end of the world as we know it.
At some point in life, and thank God.
All right. So today we're talking about basically the unsustainable nature of the way we dispose of our final remains. See, we can't even call
well,
it.
We don't dispose of it.
Well,
Other people do.
Not that can be proved.
We can't. We can't reach through the grave.
So anyway, so some of the basic costs, I'll just run these through real quick. Is for instance, the funeral home fee averages about $2,500. A coffin is $2,500, like for a basic
this is
one.
average. This is
on average. Director's fee $1,500, body preparation $750, ceremony $925, transportation, the hearse and that thing $500. The average plot runs $1,000 to $4,000. A marker, a grave marker, $2,000 to $5,000. And if you decide, okay, well, we'll just do cremation, that'll save me some money. That's only going to take about $2,000 off the total cost. So instead of around $19,000, you're going to be at about $17,000. And if you're a veteran, the generosity of our system will pay $796.
Well, that's an improvement. It was $425. So
right. So anyway, so those are some of the reasons. Now I've kind of said, okay, we're running out of space. There are toxins, there are pollutions, there's high cost. Yep. So what are some of the solutions, some of the alternatives?
Some of the solutions. Well, one of the solutions, which I'll just go back to the idea of the cremation, is you can donate.
All right. Well, that's my last.
Okay. Well, we talked about that.
All right. I'm going to walk through in order because I have a list and I'm sticking to it. So,
all righty.
All right. So one option is, and I'll probably mispronounce this, but resumation, which is basically biocremation. Ooh. So rather than burning the body, what they do is they soak this body in alkali and lye, so it dissolves all of the organic
material. It's like a bad
material.
Film.
Well, do you want to be wet or burned? So it takes.
No, I don't want to melt. I don't know.
80% less energy is used in this process than cremation. So it gives off about 1/10 of the emissions, and then the liquids that are left over just simply go through the sewer system, and they help in the breaking down of other things that are in the sewer system.
Right.
So
how much does that cost?
I don't know. I'm assuming it's comparable to cremation, but that's just a wild guess.
So, but here's the thing: when I see it in my mind, and of course I won't be there when I'm dead to see it, but it's like one of those films where they show everybody sort of melting.
Yeah. Well, it's all nasty. I mean, all of these things are nasty.
Good point. That's a good point.
It's just something we don't want to think about, but it's going to happen to everybody.
I like the idea of being in a box buried where the microbes come and eat you.
Well, then that's another option. There you go.
I like that.
The whole idea of green burials.
Yeah, I love that.
And so you say, okay, well, instead of paying for a mahogany box with brass buckles and velvet line, just give me a basic paper or bamboo or pine or no box at all. Just wrap the bottom in a shroud.
Mm-hmm. I have my shroud ready.
You put it into the ground. There is no state that prohibits this.
Wow, that's cool.
And no state mandates that you have to have a particular container for the body. And in fact, most states prohibit funeral directors from not letting you pick which, if you go in and say, right, I want a funeral, but I don't want your casket. I've got this old cardboard box.
But I do want to say that I'm sure that if the funeral home gets involved in this, where like they have to come and retrieve the body from somewhere or whatever, then you're going to not have a free ride. They're going to sock it to you, especially if they realize you're not going to pay for all their other stuff.
Well, and that's always a problem because it is an industry.
Yes,
once again, and it's like the medical model. Once you get into the system, you lose control. So in a green burial, there is no embalming. That makes sense. Right.
Mm-hmm. Well, there's some religions that don't want that.
Yeah, sure.
Say it's wrong to embalm,
and that you would then once the body is put into the ground, if there is no embalming and there is no casket, then it leaves no chemical trace. The body
if
decomposes.
They weren't full of pharmaceuticals or whatever.
But so that's part of it, and there is even a concept that you were replenishing the quality of the land.
Well, sure, because the microbes have
Sure.
something to eat, and they're bringing
It's
all that
fertilizer.
back.
You
Yeah,
become fertilizer.
yeah.
And there are
Well,
some
maybe
green
not fertilizer,
cemeteries.
but
Some green cemeteries take it to the extreme where they say, okay, we've got this plot of land that is nutrient poor. We're going to use the bodies to replenish the land, and we are not even going to have markers. So you would be giving, not you because you'd be dead, but your family would be given GPS coordinates. So instead of a marker for the grave, you were located at this particular place. And, they can plant trees or they can do whatever, but that becomes a pure green kind of burial cemetery. So that's kind of taking it to the extreme. And there are those people who would maybe not like that because there is a certain cultural value and personal value in being able to see a marker and say, yes, this is someone I knew, or this is some ancestor or whatever. And that's something that's lost because all of this stuff is lost. There's something lost because we found, for instance, we loved in Europe to go walking through cemeteries and just look at
the stories.
Look at the graves and look at the old, and they're usually peaceful places and
and landscape,
almost like walking through a museum, or like an art center. But it's something that will be lost, and it's going to be lost regardless because it's a luxury we as a world cannot
it's
afford.
An antiquated way of dealing with death that we've hung on to, which we gave away all the other antiquated parts that are really meaningful, and then that's what we've got left, and we've given up our power.
Sure. Well, we can reclaim some of that. We can reclaim the idea of home burials, and home burials is something you and I have discussed. And again, I want to reemphasize, I want to be dead first. That's usually a legal
I'll make
requirement.
sure. Right? I'll have some way to make sure.
So this was the norm prior to the 1930s. Most family, they had their family plot or they did whatever locally. These home burials are legal in all states except Arkansas, California, Indiana, Louisiana, Washington State, and Washington, D.C. And in 3 states, California, Indiana, and Louisiana, they are illegal. Probably the only things those 3 states have in common with each other is they don't want you burying bodies at home. But probably in all 3 states, people do it, and they're just not caught.
Yeah.
There are 10 states that require that a funeral director be involved in the process.
Yeah.
But in most states, like the state of Ohio, once the death certificate has been signed, then you as the next of kin basically own the body. And you can take it to your home and bury it.
Hang out with it.
Bury it in a fashion that, obviously there are cultural requirements, but there may not be legal requirements. There are often local ordinances, but not statewide. So you might say, okay, you can't bury the body closer than 10 feet to a property line or near a stream or
if
water.
it's not embalmed, you have to bury it within a certain period of time.
Right, that's
so
usually
it's going
the
to be
case.
Local. You would have to know more about not just what the state says, but also local thinking, health department stuff.
Yeah, and how deep in the ground the body's
you don't want it hooving back up with the freeze and thaw.
Or animals digging, if you've got to get it like
problem.
3 feet below at least. And of course they usually say, 6 feet under kind of thing. So
it's a huge problem because it could be a huge problem because like when we bury dead animals, if you don't get it deep enough, that scent is pretty strong for an awful lot of coons and dogs and
I think I read somewhere that if 2.5 feet is basically, they call it like the odor barrier or something like that. So there is some, but I'm sure it deals with soil type and the like. So that's an issue. So it's not like it's pure easy to deal with this, both emotionally.
So bring in a backhoe, dig the place out, throw the body in, cover it back over. You're good to go.
And there are some organizations like there's the National Home Funeral Alliance, and they have some really specific guidelines on how to do this, how to dig the grave, what tools you need.
Cool.
Like that.
We should get a copy of that.
So that's good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So they're local ordinance. Then there's another one which would be a little bit easier than, of course, burying the body, would be bio urns. So if the remains have been cremated, Then you can buy, they call them like tree pods, where you get a decomposable container, and they usually put things like peat moss or fertilizer or soil in with the ashes and the seed to a tree of some sort, and you just simply bury it, and then a tree grows from.
Boy, they can sell anything.
Yeah, well, and you can buy it on Amazon. It's like $100 to $200. And actually, when I was looking,
but you couldn't use your own little.
Oh yeah, you could use a milk carton or something. It doesn't really matter as long as it's big enough. But these things give it a little bit more, I don't know, ceremony. And there's usually not a whole lot of restrictions as to where these things can be buried. Talked about public parks. Probably don't want to get.
They can't be buried at the cemetery because
that's a business.
When my mother died and I had ashes, they said, okay, so you have to have a special little vault thing that's like a miniature of the vault for the casket, and it costs so much to open the grave, and then it has to go in there a certain way, and then it costs so much to close the grave. I'm like, I'm not doing that.
Yeah, well, and that's not a law. That's just their business model.
Right. $1,000 or something just to put the ashes somewhere.
And then, of course, there's another option, which this is your favorite option, which is donate the body, right? Donate it to science, to a medical school. I know you've made arrangements with Ohio University Osteopathic School.
So let me talk a little bit about that process. You've got to be under a certain weight in order to qualify for the program, and you have to be alive. So if you've already
alive when you sign the agreement,
yes, that's right.
Not when you donate the body.
You have to be alive when you sign the agreement, and so it can't be your relative trying to get you into the program and you've just died. It's a fantastic program. It helps medical students and people working to be physical therapists. The one at OU was really helpful to me when my brother died very suddenly.
And they were amazingly compassionate.
Yeah, they were really great. And they came and got the body. There was no cost. And then they had a beautiful ceremony once a year, which we went to and were able to speak. And all of the medical students and physical therapy people were there, and they were so honoring. We made buttons that had a picture of my brother when he was young, and the students came up and said, could we have one of those? Because we don't really get to know the names and we'd like to see. And they did keep the body for quite a long time, which made me feel good that he had really contributed something. And he was a nasty soul. And so this was the one good thing that he'd done in his life, was to ask to have this.
Okay, well, on that pleasant note, on this pleasant
well,
topic.
I'm just saying anything's possible.
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Well, we want to thank you. You've been listening to When the Biomass Hits the Wind Turbine with Jay and Annie Warmke. We want to thank our Emmy Award-winning producer, Adam Rich, who is still alive. We'll make that note.
He's silent,
and we want to
though.
thank you for spending just a little bit of time with us. And as your grandmother hopefully told you, the secret to a happy and sustainable life is...
play nice with others, clean up your own mess, and you should arrange your death before it happens.
Yeah, it's a problem for those that are left over. All right, till next time. Bye-bye.
Bye.
I know the stars are dancing in the firelight. Soon we'll be together, and all will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and her children will be healed. 'Cause I see the morning glory blossom in the night. I know the stars are dancing in the twilight. Soon we'll be together, and all will be revealed. Mother Earth will sing, and her children will be healed.
You can find more information on living sustainably in our unsustainable world at bluerockstation.com.